Hi, I'm Finn.
And I'm Gabe, and this week we're reviewing Nobody.
So, quick start off for anyone who doesn't know about Nobody. It's an action movie with Bob Odenkirk, who you're like, oh, that's the guy from Better Call Saul, and you would be correct about that. But in this movie, he's actually an action hero, and he is fighting the Russian mob who are trying to keep their money from getting taken. Gabe, it's a really thrilling movie, I gotta tell you.
Yeah, no, this is one of my favorite action movies. I think it was really underappreciated the year it came out. So let me ask you this. Bob Odenkirk, we don't normally think of him as an action star. In my mind, he's Saul Goodman. How do you think he does in this role reversal playing an action hero?
I think it's definitely weird for him because he's more of a comedian. I mean, he started out with Mr. Show with David Cross. You know, that's kind of his roots in comedy. But then he kind of does this action movie, and I know there's another action movie with him coming out, but I thought it was a really solid start for him. I think he gives a really interesting performance, not only in the action roles, of which he spent 2 years bulking up, which he does pretty well in, but also in the kind of more traditional family roles, trying to deal with the delegating. He's this assassin, but he also has this family of which he puts his wife of crime almost on hold, and then he goes back to his family. So it's a really complex mix he has to deal with, and I thought he did it pretty well.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think when I came into it, I had very low expectations because, obviously Bob Odenkirk is an action star. That's not something you'd ever expect. But he does a really good job of playing this guy who's been weary. He spent so long, he says in the movie, he thinks he kind of overcorrected trying to play this part of someone who isn't a killer. So when it's time to return back to that lifestyle, it's really interesting. This movie has a couple other people who we don't normally see in action movies in these roles. We got the RZA from Wu-Tang Clan as apparently Bob Odenkirk's adopted brother, and Christopher Lloyd as his father. So what do you think of their performances in Nobody?
I thought that his brother is in it for a very small amount of time. He comes in, he has a good machine gun scene, which is always a good thing. But then his father, he has a very, very funny scene when you think he's just this old, dilapidated man, but then he comes and he pulls out a shotgun and he kills these two Russian hitmen. So I thought that was quite an interesting scene. So overall, I thought they did pretty well. It was kind of, you could say it's a little generic in terms of the villain. They were just a bunch of Russian mobsters.
Yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, it's not the most, you're not going to get reinvented genre there, but it's kind of Ukraine-Russian thing. It's never a bad thing to, see beating up on the Russians a little bit.
Yeah, I would agree with that take. I think it's really cool. This movie, it contains, having Christopher Lloyd be in it gave us one of the maybe greatest action lines I think ever said, which is, Dad, you brought a lot of shotguns. Well, you brought a lot of Russians. I think the fact that we got Christopher Lloyd to say that on film is pretty genius. So let me ask you this. Action movies don't work unless the action sequences absolutely hit. So what do you think of the action sequences in this? And then do you have a favorite?
Yeah, so the first main action scene, which is kind of shocking when he's on the bus, obviously. I think it's in the trailer, so you probably know it if you saw the trailer. But it's kind of it kind of hits you because you don't expect it to be coming. And I thought that was probably the best of the movie, honestly. There's one where it's almost like a Home Alone type of thing where they go back to this warehouse and it's kind of booby trapped and all the Russians are kind of falling over each other. But I think the one in the bus was really good because it's in a confined space. It's kind of hard to shoot an action shot like that. It's a lot easier when you have these big Marvel canvases with all these people and CGI running into each other. So I thought that was a more unique action scene, and it really worked for the movie.
Yeah, I think it's really cool, that bus scene in particular, because it's got stages to it. The first one, he hasn't fought in a while, so he gets his ass handed to him pretty quick. The second one, he starts doing a better job, but then he's thrown out of a window. And then the third stage of the fight, he gets the girl that he's trying to save safely off the bus, and he rips one of the poles out of the ground and starts beating people up with it. It's absolutely wonderful. And I think going back to that bus scene, there's a moment where he's choking out a gangster with the brake sign from the bus, and it cuts to just the stop requested, stop requested, stop requested. So I think that brings me to my next point, which is, even though this is Bob Odenkirk playing an action star, there's a lot of really cool comedic moments in this. So do you think that breaks up the tone of it being an action movie, or did you like those breaks for something humorous?
I think it would have been a little disingenuous to just try and play a straight action movie with someone like Bob Odenkirk. I think for him to just show up and everyone try and pretend like he's The Rock all of a sudden would not have been a very good decision for his character. So I kind of liked how they did that. It definitely is almost the beginning is almost this comedy, he's the center of every joke, where it's he's such a weak man, his son is just brutal towards him. So that's kind of the comedy in the beginning, and then it kind of goes on. It's almost comedic how big of a badass he is. But overall, I think they did pretty well at negotiating that and having it work in pretty well.
I don't think the tonal shifts are too jarring. There's some ways that, the marvelization of action movies is a little bit felt in this, in the sense that, like, for example, there's a really big, and I would say my favorite fight scene in this movie, it's technically a car chase, but he's got the seat all the way back, he's got a pistol, and Heartbreaker is playing by Pat Benatar, and he's, like, driving circles around this bus, and it's really cool, really well shot. But, like, immediately after, it, like, stops for, like, these joke moments, and it opens with one. And so I don't love the switches from tone, but I agree with you that it would be a little bit disingenuous if they didn't include them. There are a couple things, though, like you said, that I don't love that are in this movie, particularly, how generic the villains are. It's really, really stupid. But also, there's this, like, subplot with his daughter and a necklace and a cat. And it just feels like in some ways there's too much crammed into this movie. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think it was kind of like he was almost like a recovering drug addict. Like, he was in the CIA, he was killing all these people, and then he'd kind of gone off it. He'd gone back to his normal life. And then the thing that kind of set him off again wasn't some big thing of heroin, if you're using the analogy. It was a tiny little, like, kitty cat and like keychain. Yeah. Like, it feels like it would have had to be a bigger thing to spur the moment for him to, like, completely turn a 180 on what he'd been building for the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a little tough, but they needed to get some way to kind of get him into his, like, final character.
Yeah, so I would agree with you that, like, the catalyst for his change doesn't quite make sense because it's his daughter's bracelet was stolen. Like, it's just, I feel like there would have been stuff besides that to set him over the edge. So I do draw issue with that. I would say, I think part of it is shot really well, but I would say it's shot very kinetically in the sense that there's, like, always stuff going on screen. So I think there are times when it's a little bit too busy. But we talked about the good, we talked about the bad. Finn, 1 out of 10, what would you give Nobody?
It was one of the few movies that was actually coming out during COVID. That was, like, a real movie. I think it came out 2021. Like, they really had trouble filming. So I think I would definitely give it some points for that because they had obviously issues with that. I would give it an 8.5 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 9. I've seen Nobody plenty times. I love it. It's not a perfect movie, but, like, popcorn, action movie, super enjoyable. It does everything it needs to do well. That's all from us. We'll see you next time.